The town of Havenwood wasn't built on much. A single stretch of cracked asphalt, a defunct lumber mill, and a police station, a squat, concrete bunker that smelled permanently of stale coffee and industrial cleaner. Officer Marcus Thorne, 32, a man whose eyes had seen too much small-town misery for his age, watched the rain turn the main street's neon sign reflections into shimmering, broken Rorschachs. It was 3:17 a.m., the time when the world was supposed to be the quietest. Thorne preferred the night shift. He liked the silence, the lack of bureaucratic chatter, and the way the shadows wrapped around the town, hiding its ugliness. But tonight, the silence felt different. It was a suffocating, unnatural vacuum, like the air had been sucked out of a closed room. His partner, Officer Lena Reyes, was engrossed in a true crime podcast, the tinny voice of the narrator a faint buzz in the cruiser. "You're tense, Thorne," she noted, not looking up. "Is it the coffee, or are you expecting the Havenwood Ripper to finally make his debut?" Thorne didn't smile. "It's the air pressure. And the radio. It's too clean." The police radio, a temperamental, static hissing beast, was unnervingly quiet. No drunk driving reports, no domestic disturbances, not even a cat stuck up a tree. Just a smooth, unbroken white noise that was more unsettling than a burst of static. "You're just paranoid," Reyes said, finally pausing her podcast. "It's Friday. Everyone's either asleep or too wasted to dial 911. Then, the smooth silence cracked. It wasn't a call for service. It was a low, guttural sound, bleeding into the radio frequency, too deep to be human, too close to be a skip from a distant station. It sounded like a massive piece of metal scraping against concrete, or maybe a wet, heavy cough coming from inside the radio speaker itself. Reyes's casual posture straightened. "What the hell was that?" Thorne's hand went instinctively to the volume dial, turning it down, but the sound didn't diminish. It seemed to be vibrating through the dashboard, a bass frequency that settled in his chest. The sound stopped as abruptly as it began, replaced by a single, sharp burst of static, and then a strange, distorted human voice. "Code 307. Repeat, code 307. The light is hungry. The light is..." The voice dissolved into a distorted, liquid shriek that made Reyes physically flinch. The code 307 was an archaic, retired code number for unexplained loss of communication, a relic from the station's pre-digital era. It hadn't been used in 30 years. That's dispatch," Reyes whispered, her hand hovering over her own mic, but it was wrong. "That's not Brenda." Brenda was the usual night dispatcher, a woman who sounded like she chewed glass for breakfast. This voice was younger, sweeter, and ended in a sound that was pure terror. Thorne pulled the cruiser over, the tires crunching on loose gravel. He looked out at the familiar, rain-streaked windows of the town's old library, and for the first time, Havenwood felt alien. "I'm calling in," he said, his voice flat. He reached for the handheld radio, but Reyes stopped him. "Look." She pointed to a set of streetlights 2 blocks ahead. They didn't flicker or die. They simply blacked out, simultaneously, as if a master switch for that specific block had been flipped. The darkness didn't just absorb the light, it seemed to intensify the surrounding shadows, making the nearest alley mouth look like a physical maw. Thorne checked his console. The town-wide emergency system indicator, a small, green LED light, was dark. The entire grid was usually linked to a central backup, designed to never fail silently. That's a full grid failure for that sector. "No storm, no overload, just gone," he muttered. He looked at Reyes. "We go in quiet. No sirens. And stick to the patrol route. We find the source of the blackout, and we find out who made that call." As they drove, the shadows seemed to deepen, pressing in against the meager throw of their headlights. The smooth, dead air on the radio returned, but underneath it, Thorne could swear he heard a faint, persistent ticking. Not from a clock, but something else. Something organic and patient. Then, Reyes pointed again, this time to a building they were passing, the old, abandoned town courthouse, etched into the glass of the main double door, as clear as if a diamond had been used, was a symbol. A crude, unsettling circle with a dozen uneven spokes radiating outward. It looked new, and right beneath it, a single, looping word, eat. Thorne didn't need to be a seasoned cop to know that this was the start of something terrible. It was a mark, and the terrifying silence of the town was its audience. Thorne drove past the marked courthouse, his foot heavy on the accelerator, adrenaline overriding the instinct to stop and analyze the chilling graffiti. "We're not stopping for vandalism, Reyes," he said, his voice tight. "We need to get to the station. If the phones are out, we need to check the comms log and that 307 file." The Havenwood police station was a relief to see a beacon of institutional ugliness amidst the gathering gloom. They pulled into the nearly empty parking lot. Sergeant Dale, a heavy-set man who usually dozed in the back office, was nowhere to be seen. The front desk was abandoned. The small, windowless office belonging to communications and records was in the back. It was usually locked tight, but the door was ajar. "Sergeant Dale must have left it open," Reyes muttered, pulling her service weapon. "Or maybe whoever made that call is still inside." They moved through the silent station, the fluorescent lights humming too loud in the absence of human noise. The records room was cold, the air thick with the smell of old paper and dust, motes dancing in the shaft of light from the single bulb. Thorne went straight for the computer terminals. They were dead. Full system shut down. They didn't just cut the power, Reyes, they isolated the network. Everything's offline. Reyes, meanwhile, was scanning the metal filing cabinets lining the back wall. She found the obsolete codes section. It was the only cabinet that wasn't locked. Inside, a single, brittle manila folder with code 307 handwritten on the tab. She pulled it out, the paper smelling strongly of mildew and something else, a faint, metallic scent. "It's all handwritten reports," she whispered, laying the documents on a dusty desk. The first page was a memo dated 1965, signed by a Chief Miller. It detailed the creation of Code 307, reserved exclusively for the failure of communication due to external, unidentifiable, and non-technological interference, resulting in temporary, localized hysteria among operators and personnel. Thorne's eyes widened. Non-technological interference? What the hell does that even mean? Reyes flipped to the case reports. There were only 2 recorded instances of Code 307 ever being officially logged. Case Log 307, a 1969, 2 operators reported hearing singing over the main line before a total blackout of the town square sector. The singing was described as inhumanly resonant and resulted in one operator, Margaret Hollis, having a severe panic attack requiring hospitalization. Power was restored 6 hours later. No physical cause found. Hollis transferred out of state. Case Log 307, B, 1985, during a routine midnight shift, dispatch operator K. Peterson reported a loss of vision and a feeling of extreme hunger, immediately preceding a comms failure. Peterson claimed to see shadows moving against the light. Last known transmission. The void is growing. It takes the light. Peterson resigned the following day, citing psychological distress. Reyes looked up at Thorne, her face pale under the harsh fluorescent light. The void is growing, it takes the light, and our call was the light is hungry. It's the same core message, Thorne confirmed, tracing the lines of the old report with his finger. This isn't random. Someone is using this file, this old, dark history, to scare us. Or maybe, to warn us. Suddenly, a loud, muffled thump came from the hallway outside the records room. It sounded heavy, like a body hitting the linoleum. Thorne immediately pushed Reyes behind the filing cabinets. "Stay down." "Dale," he called out, his voice sharp, weapon raised. Silence. Then, the sound of a slow, dragging weight approaching their doorway. Reyes pointed a trembling finger at the last document in the folder. It was a recent edition, a sheet of fresh, modern copier paper tucked into the back, not faded like the others. It wasn't a police report, it was a crude drawing. The same unsettling circle and spoke symbol from the courthouse window was drawn in thick black ink. Next to it, in shaky handwriting, was a new, chilling entry. They only mark the places where the power is weakest. They draw the symbol where the feeding begins. Havenwood's silence is not empty. It's waiting to be filled. The hungry things love the dead air. The dragging sound stopped right outside the records room door. A shadow, long and impossibly thin, stretched under the door crack, wavering slightly, like a sheet of dark water. Reyes whispered, her voice barely audible, "Thorne, look." She pointed to the top of the modern sheet. Where the date should have been, there was only one word. Now. The heavy, dragging thing outside the door inhaled, a wet, rattling sound that was too close, too loud. "Back door." Now, Thorne hissed, gripping his weapon. He knew the heavy sound outside wasn't Sergeant Dale. It was too slow, too deliberate. And the warning in the file suggested this presence thrived on the isolation of the blackout. He backed away from the doorway, keeping his focus locked on the thin, wavering shadow beneath the crack. Reyes, her breath hitching, quickly gathered the code 307 file. The records room had a rarely used fire escape door leading into a narrow, fenced-off storage alley. Thorne reached the steel bar, threw his weight against it, and the door burst open with a squeal of rusted hinges, drowning out the sound of the creature outside. They scrambled out into the damp night air. The storage alley was a concrete canyon between the station and the neighboring defunct bank. "Which way?" Reyes whispered, her eyes starting nervously between the black windows of the bank and the solid rear wall of the police station. "Evidence locker," Thorne replied, jogging toward the back service entrance. "It's the only room in the building with hardened steel walls and a separate power supply for the environmental controls. If anything can survive this blackout, it's that room." They reached the service door, Thorne punching in the heavy security code. His fingers were slick with nervous sweat, fumbling the final digit. Beep, beep, beep. Access denied. The network, Reyes realized, her voice trembling. "It's locked down the digital controls. We need the physical key." Thorne swore under his breath. The physical key was kept on a heavy brass ring in Sergeant Dale's office. Suddenly, a wet, smacking sound echoed from the front of the alley, the sound of something heavy pulling itself around the corner of the building. "It knows we're out here," Thorne muttered, pulling Reyes close to the solid steel door. "Okay, back to Dale's office." We go through the garage. The garage was dimly lit by a single, emergency battery-powered bulb, casting long, frantic shadows of the patrol cars. They moved quickly and quietly, their footsteps muffled by the oil-stained concrete. They found Sergeant Dale's office door open. The room was a disaster. Papers were scattered everywhere. The chair was overturned, and a large, dark stain, definitely blood, marred the carpet near the desk. "Oh God," Dale, Reyes whispered, covering her mouth. The keyring wasn't on the desk or the coat rack. Thorne scanned the room quickly, noticing the heavy, cast-iron lid of the paper shredder was askew. He reached into the dark opening, his fingers finding something hard and cold. He pulled out the keyring, slightly sticky with residue. "Got it," he confirmed. As they turned to leave, a movement caught Thorne's eye. On the whiteboard, where Dale usually scrawled duty rosters, a new message had been written in thick, dark ink, the same color as the stain on the floor. It was a meticulous, looping script. He was loud. He was full of light. The quiet ones get to keep their flesh. The implication struck them both with the force of a physical blow. Dale hadn't just been attacked. He had been silenced for being too loud. The quiet ones. Reyes repeated, her voice barely a breath. We have to be quiet. They raced back through the garage to the evidence locker door. Thorne fumbled with the key, his hands shaking so violently he nearly dropped the heavy brass ring. The tumblers clicked, and the heavy door opened onto a smaller, inner steel cage, the actual secure room. They slipped inside, Thorne quickly relocking the heavy door and throwing the secondary bolt. The air in the inner room was dry, cool, and silent, a perfect, preserved vacuum. The environmental controls hummed softly, powered by its own dedicated generator. They were safe. For now, Thorne leaned against the cool metal wall, trying to catch his breath, the smell of formaldehyde and old evidence a weird comfort. He looked at Reyes, who was staring at the small, metal shelf next to a stack of sealed brown bags on that shelf, placed neatly under a small card labeled Case 89-012, the Havenwood. Disappearances was an object.it was a small, hand-bound book. The cover was stitched with black, dry leather, perhaps human skin, judging by the texture. The title, embossed in a strange, non-Latin script, seemed to drink the light. Reyes reached for it slowly. Thorne, Case 89-012. That's the cold case file they locked up and never talked about. The one where 3 families vanished without a trace in the middle of a town-wide power outage. The book was slightly damp and cool to the touch. As Reyes opened the cover, the silence of the steel room was broken only by the soft hiss of the air conditioning unit. The first page was not paper. It was a dense sheet of cured material, covered in the same looping, dark writing they saw on Dale's whiteboard. The first line was a horrifying dedication. The Grimoire of the Night Shift. A record of the things that eat the noise. The implication was clear. The creature, whatever it was, hadn't just attacked Sergeant Dale. It had led them to this book. It was an invitation, or perhaps a dreadful heirloom, left for the new keepers of the station's dark secrets. We can't just leave this, Reyes insisted, her voice a low, fierce whisper, holding the macabre grimoire carefully. The creature led us here, Thorne. This book is the key to Code 307. We need to know what the light is hungry means. Thorne was already trying to use the secure landline in the evidence locker, but the receiver was dead. No signal. Dedicated line or not, they severed the connection to the outside world. Havenwood is sealed off. Our only priority is making it to dawn, and that book, he pointed, looks like the kind of thing that makes the night longer. Despite his protest, Thorne leaned closer, pulled in by the awful significance of the object. The pages inside weren't made of ordinary paper. They felt leathery and thin, and the dark ink seemed to shimmer faintly when viewed at certain angles. Reyes began to flip through the pages, describing what she saw. It's not just writing. It's a police log. Look, dates, times, and locations. But the reports are fragmented. She pointed to an entry corresponding to the 1985 Code 307 incident. The shadow took his face first. He was trying to warn us, calling out the license plate number of the intruder. Too much noise. The void likes the quiet. It leaves the quiet ones intact. It took his eyes. The dispatcher, Peterson, was staring at the security monitor. The monitor was full of white light. She kept screaming about the glare. Thorne ran his hand through his hair. The glare. The light is hungry. It's a predator that hunts through noise and feeds on light. Reyes nodded grimly, flipping further. She found a diagram, a crude cross-section of the town's outdated electrical grid, specifically the sector that had blacked out. Look at this. She pointed to the diagram. The sections marked with the Code 307 symbol, the courthouse, the old library, and that abandoned mill, they're not just random blackout points. They're points where the original 19th century gas lines intersect with the modern power grid. A nexus of old and new energy flow. Thorne knelt beside her. So, whoever wrote this, a previous cop, or maybe one of the disappearances, figured out where it strikes. But why? Reyes's finger traced a line of text scrawled along the bottom of the diagram. The handwriting frantic and messy. It doesn't steal the power. It steals the energy of the light itself. The longer the blackout, the stronger it gets. It fills the town's quiet places. It's collecting fuel. The realization hit Thorne with paralyzing clarity. The blackouts weren't a side effect of the creature's activity. They were the mechanism. The quiet, dead sectors were where it congregated, and the grimoire was tracking its feeding pattern. The courthouse, the library, Thorne whispered. Those places are full of silence after hours. They're cold and empty. Suddenly, the lights in the evidence locker flickered. The soft, comforting hum of the dedicated generator sputtered, coughed, and died. Silence. The total, suffocating silence of the night had finally penetrated their last refuge. The generator, Reyes breathed, clutching the grimoire to her chest. It found the power source. It's starving out the light. They were plunged into absolute darkness, broken only by the dim, silver moonlight leaking through the small, reinforced wire mesh window high up in the wall. Then, they heard it, a noise they recognized instantly, but which was now terrifyingly close. The low, guttural, ticking sound they had heard earlier on the radio was now vibrating through the steel walls of the evidence locker itself. It sounded like an enormous insect trapped inside the metalwork. The ticking stopped. It was replaced by a sound that made their blood run cold. The slow, deliberate scraping of something sharp dragging along the exterior of the steel door. It was testing the perimeter of their cage. Reyes pointed toward the small window, her eyes wide with terror. A dark, impossibly long shadow began to creep across the wire mesh, blocking the moonlight. It was reaching. Searching. Thorne knew they couldn't stay in the pitch-black, silent cage. The grimoire had given them a dreadful kind of intelligence, but now they had to use it to fight the blackout. Reyes, Thorne said, his voice strained but steady. We need to get to the generator room. It's 1 floor down, near the sub-basement. We have to bring the light back online. If the book is right, the light is what keeps it contained. He reached for his radio one last time, hoping for a miracle. He clicked the transmit button. The speaker hissed with static, then a clear, calm voice, not Brenda's, not the sweet, terrified voice, but a new one, deep and resonant, came through. You are making noise. Do not feed it the light. The voice was directly warning them, using the creature's own dialect. But was it a friend or a trap? Thorne didn't hesitate. The voice on the radio, whether friend or foe, sounded too placid, too certain of their doom in the silence. But the grimoire had given them a guiding principle. The entity hated the light. We bring the light back, Thorne decided, unbolting the heavy steel door of the evidence locker. That voice is either the creature itself, or it's trying to paralyze us. Light is our only chance. The instant the door opened, the oppressive silence of the hallway hit them like a physical force. It wasn't just the absence of sound. It felt like the active muffling of sound. Thorne switched on his heavy-duty police flashlight. The beam sliced through the absolute blackness, revealing the hallway, a long corridor of empty lockers and closed office doors. The air was colder now, heavy with the scent of ozone and rot. Quiet, Reyes, he whispered, his own voice sounding unnaturally loud and brittle. Don't break the quiet unless you have to. They moved side by side, their boots making soft, scuffing sounds on the linoleum. Every shadow thrown by the flashlight seemed to stretch, twist, and momentarily hold a shape that wasn't there. The ominous ticking sound returned, a slow, methodical tick-tick, tick-tick. It was no longer coming from the walls, but from down the main hallway, moving slowly, a perfect counter-rhythm to their frantic heartbeats. It was hunting. They reached the door marked Stairs to Sub-Basement. It was a heavy steel fire door, almost always locked, but Thorne found it slightly ajar, just enough for a sliver of darkness to leak out. Reyes stopped, gripping the grimoire tighter. Wait, let me check the book. I have a bad feeling about the basement. She quickly flipped to a section of the grimoire detailing the station's original structure. The writing was in the same panic scrawl. The sub-basement. The foundation. They built the station on the old town archives, the sealed-off memories. The thing does not just feed on light. It feeds on guilt and static, the noise we keep hidden. The basement is the loudest place in Havenwood, though silent to the ear. It's the repository of the town's forgotten sins. If you go below, you're entering the mouth of the thing. Thorne saw the fear in Reyes's eyes, but there was no turning back. The ticking was getting closer, moving down the hall behind them, sounding wetter, heavier now, as if the creature had dragged itself off the floor. We go. The light is the antidote to the sin, Thorne insisted, pushing the door open. The air in the stairwell was immediately thicker, colder, and smelled powerfully of concrete dust and something metallic, like burnt pennies. The narrow concrete steps spiraled down into perfect blackness. As they began their descent, Reyes's foot slipped on a patch of moisture. She stumbled, and the heavy brass keyring Thorne had retrieved clattered down 3 steps, the metallic ring. Echoing deafeningly in the confined space, the effect was instantaneous and horrific. The rhythmic tick-tick from above them stopped. The silence rushed back in, but it was charged, vibrating with unseen energy. Then, from the darkness above them, came a sound that wasn't ticking. It was a high-pitched, frenzied scraping, like a dozen fingernails clawing at the concrete. The creature had heard the noise, and it was moving with blinding speed. Go. Go. Thorne yelled, pushing Reyes down the stairs, his flashlight beam frantically searching for the sub-basement door. They hit the bottom landing, scrambling toward the only door, a solid, steel door with a small, waist-high grated observation window. Leading to the generator room, Thorne fumbled with the key, his breath ragged. The scraping sound was now right at the top of the stairwell, and something was descending the steps with impossible speed, each impact a wet, heavy thwack. He jammed the key into the lock and twisted. The heavy bolt slid back just as the first thwack landed on the bottom step. They burst into the generator room, a small chamber dominated by a massive, silent diesel generator. Thorne slammed the door shut, locking it with a desperate, final twist of the key. The room was pitch black. Thorne spun around, shining his light toward the generator's control panel, searching for the manual start lever. Reyes, keep your light on the door, he ordered. Reyes directed her beam back at the grated observation window in the door. Thorne threw the manual start switch. Nothing. He threw it again. Still nothing. The engine was cold, inert. The fuel line must be cut, he gasped, frantically checking the gauges. Reyes didn't respond. She just stood there, her light focused on the grated window, utterly motionless. Reyes? What is it? Thorne demanded, turning his own light to the door. The tiny, grated window, staring back at them, was not the creature they expected. It was the distorted, youthful face of the missing dispatcher. Her eyes were wide, glassy, and fixed in a silent scream, but what filled the space around her face, pressed tightly against the bars, was a dense, pulsating cloud of pure, suffocating darkness, a cloud that seemed to absorb the beam of Reyes's flashlight. The darkness was pushing her face forward, holding her there. Then the face whispered, its voice muffled and wet, exactly like the final transmission they had heard earlier. I tried to leave. I was too loud on the radio. They kept my face to watch the light come back on. The grimoire lies. The light doesn't stop the feeding. The light only shows them where the food is. The eyes of the dispatcher's face snapped from Reyes to Thorne, then to the massive, dormant generator behind him. And then, the creature of darkness, using the woman's mouth as a speaker, delivered the final, Dreadful message. This place, it's a feast. Turn on the light, officer, and show us all the noise you've trapped down here. The dispatcher's voice, or the entity speaking through her mouth, echoed in Thorne's mind. Turn on the light, officer, and show us all the noise you've trapped down here. He knew he couldn't fire his weapon. The noise would be instantaneous death, and the steel walls would only amplify it. He also couldn't stay passive. The darkness was already pressing against the generator room door. Thorne dropped his flashlight, letting it roll across the concrete floor where its weak beam illuminated a small puddle. He had to assume the fuel line was cut, which meant the main generator was useless. He had to look for the secondary system. Reyes, the grimoire, did it mention a secondary system? Thorne asked, his voice low and strained. Reyes, momentarily paralyzed by the sight of the dispatcher's face, snapped out of her trance. She frantically flipped through the pages, her flashlight beam scanning the terrifying script. Yes! Near the furnace room, she hissed. It's a chemical battery backup, meant for the cold storage archives, but it uses a volatile alkaline agent. Not for general lighting. Volatile is better than dead, Thorne countered. Where is the furnace room? Through the archives. Down the service tunnel, Reyes said, pointing to a small, heavy wooden door tucked beside the massive diesel generator. It's labeled HVAC Maintenance Access. As they moved toward the maintenance door, the grotesque face at the window pressed harder, its lips peeling back to reveal rows of two small, needle-like teeth. The face began to speak again, not whispering, but in a dry, rattling hiss. The furnace room. The hottest room. We hate the heat, officer. You'll be making a lot of noise there. You'll be very bright. Thorne ignored it. He threw open the wooden door, revealing a narrow, dust-choked service tunnel, a tight crawl space leading deeper into the foundation of the building. The air here was stale and heavy, like disturbed grave dirt. You go first, Reyes. Take the grimoire. Don't lose it, Thorne instructed, pushing her into the crawl space. Reyes disappeared into the darkness. Thorne followed, pulling the maintenance door shut just as the wet thump of the creature's bulk hit the main steel door behind them. They crawled through the cramped tunnel. The beam of Reyes's flashlight bobbed ahead, revealing the tunnel walls were not solid concrete, but packed earth and loose, crumbling brick, part of the sealed-off archives mentioned in the grimoire. After what felt like an hour, they reached a narrow opening that spilled them out into a vast, cavernous space. This was the true sub-basement. It wasn't a modern storage room. It was a cathedral of forgotten things. Towering, mildew-stained shelves lined the walls, filled with endless rows of old, leather-bound municipal ledgers, rusted iron boxes, and the skeletal remains of old filing cabinets, the physical sins of Havenwood's history, the noise. The grimoire warned about, and everywhere, hanging from the ceiling like morbid fruit, were dozens of small, ancient gas lamps, relics from the town's original 19th century infrastructure. This is it, Reyes breathed, pointing to a small, heavy door at the far end of the chamber, steam faintly leaking from around its frame. The furnace room. As they began to cross the vast archive floor, they realized they weren't alone. Between the rows of tall, silent shelves, small, geometric shapes of utter blackness were congregating. They weren't shadows cast by light. They were patches of anti-light that absorbed the beams of their flashlights, remaining perfectly black and sharp-edged. They were moving, a slow, methodical creep between the archives. The quiet ones, Thorne whispered, remembering the warning on the whiteboard. The quiet ones get to keep their flesh. He knew that these dark shapes were the entity in its most concentrated, feeding form. They were drawn to the noise of the forgotten archives, patiently waiting. Suddenly, a loud, heavy crack split the silence. It came from one of the shelves near them. A large, dust-covered ledger had fallen open, its brittle pages splitting upon impact. The impact, the noise, was enough to trigger a reaction. The dark, geometric shapes snapped toward the sound. They didn't glide, they fractured the space and reformed closer to the fallen book. Thorne saw his opportunity. He grabbed an empty, rusted metal container off a shelf and hurled it as hard as he could toward the far end of the archive, in the opposite direction of the furnace room. Clang. The deafening sound of metal echoing in the chamber was the loudest noise in the sub-basement. The dark shapes, the quiet ones, surged instantly toward the noise, dissolving and reforming over the shelf where the metal container landed. "Now!" Thorne shouted, and they sprinted for the furnace room door. As they reached the door, Reyes glanced back. The shadows were swirling around the area of the noise, seeming to liquefy the shelf and the archives they surrounded. The archive material itself was being consumed, not physically, but visually. The color, the texture, the very essence of the object was being leached into the inky blackness. Thorne threw open the furnace room door. The heat hit them immediately, a blast of dry, metallic heat that smelled of scorching metal and chemical residue. Inside, dominating the room, was the old, coal-fired furnace, glowing a terrifying, dull, volcanic red. And next to it, the smaller, green battery unit, the chemical backup system. Thorne rushed to the battery unit. "Find the master activation switch for the town grid." Not just the internal light, the town grid. Reyes, wiping sweat from her eyes, pointed to the grimoire. A new, faint diagram had appeared on the surface of the leather cover, drawn in what looked like dried blood. "The core of the light. It is the only thing it fears. But you must pay the noise tax." They looked at the glowing red furnace, then back at the door, which was beginning to bulge under the pressure of the concentrated darkness gathering outside. "The noise tax," Thorne muttered, looking from the small, unstable battery unit to the glowing, red-hot mouth of the old furnace. "It wants a big noise. A permanent one." Reyes, her eyes scanning the cryptic diagram on the grimoire, saw a faint inscription beneath the noise tax. Warning: the heat consumes the guilt. The alkaline purge. If the core light is activated, the residual static in the archives will be neutralized. But the tax must be loud, and the source must be close to the core. "Thorne, the furnace is the core here," Reyes realized, pointing at the massive, coal-fired behemoth. "It's the heart of the heat. And we have to use it to generate the loudest, most permanent noise possible, a distraction that purges the static from the archives." Thorne looked around the room, his eyes settling on a stack of jerrycans labeled diesel next to the defunct main generator, and then at the nearby chemical battery backup. "We can't just throw diesel in the coal furnace. It'll just burn hot," Thorne said. "We need something explosive, a singular, deafening sound that will overload the thing's senses and buy us time to flip the town grid switch." He then noticed a small, metal cabinet labeled hazardous waste. He pried it open with the butt of his pistol. Inside, amongst old containers of cleaning fluids, was a canister of highly corrosive sodium hydroxide, a key component of the volatile alkaline agent used in the backup battery. The grimoire mentioned an alkaline purge, Reyes whispered. Thorne grabbed the canister and rushed to the furnace. "We're going to create the loudest possible reaction inside the furnace. We hit the core with a blinding noise, flip the switch, and pray the town grid overpowers whatever this thing is." He swiftly began to empty one of the diesel jerrycans into the furnace's open access door, saturating the remaining coal. "When I say run, you activate the battery unit and find that master town switch," Thorne instructed Reyes. "It's probably a manual pull lever, not a button." Reyes positioned herself by the green battery unit, her finger hovering over the activation button. The grimoire clutched under her arm. Thorne took the canister of sodium hydroxide. The chemical was violently reactive to water and many organic compounds. He glanced one last time at the furnace, the roaring heat and the volatile mix of diesel and coal within. "Ready, Reyes?" As I'll ever be, she replied, her voice taut with terror. Thorne emptied the entire contents of the sodium hydroxide canister into the furnace. The reaction was immediate and cataclysmic. A blinding, searing flash of orange and green fire erupted from the furnace door, followed by an earth-shattering boom. The furnace door warped outward, and a wave of heat and concussive force slammed Thorne backward into the concrete wall. The noise was absolute. A permanent scar on the night's silence. Clang. The booming echo drowned out everything else. No! Thorne yelled, staggering to his feet. Reyes didn't wait. She slammed her hand down on the battery unit's activation button. The small, green unit hissed violently, then began to glow a blinding, artificial, chemical blue. Simultaneously, a massive, rusted lever on the wall, the master town grid switch, clicked into the on position, manually triggered by the surge from the chemical battery. Outside the furnace room, the silence was instantly and brutally torn apart. The concentrated darkness clinging to the steel door shrieked a wet, inhuman sound of pain and outrage that somehow cut through the ringing in their ears. The shadow mass recoiled, dissolving momentarily. Through the door, they heard a chorus of sounds that had been unnaturally muffled. The distant whine of electrical transformers powering up, the crackle of the main police radio in the office upstairs, and the faint, beautiful sound of a car alarm accidentally triggered somewhere downtown. The light was back, but the job wasn't over. The blue chemical light filling the furnace room was attracting the entity, not repelling it. The tunnels. Back too. The crawl space. Thorne coughed, grabbing Reyes's arm. They scrambled back through the access door and into the tight, dark service tunnel. Behind them, the shriek intensified, and they heard the horrific sound of the steel door being wrenched off its hinges. The creature was in the furnace room, and it was furious. As they crawled desperately toward the main basement, the blue light from the battery unit behind them began to intensify, filling the narrow tunnel with a painful, blinding chemical glare. Thorne, the grimoire. Reyes gasped. She was pointing to the diagram on the cover. The symbol was pulsing, and new script had appeared underneath. The town is loud. The void is full. The core light is its only prison. You must bring it back home. Thorne understood. They hadn't just turned on the lights. They had created a temporary trap. The powerful, localized chemical light was the one thing that could contain the creature. We have to lure it into the furnace room, Reyes. And seal it in with that core light, Thorne said, crawling faster, the immense sense of dread replaced by a cold, desperate resolve. Thorne and Reyes scrambled out of the maintenance tunnel and back into the vast, echoing silence of the sub-basement archive. The town's electrical grid was humming back to life, but the archive chamber itself remained dark, illuminated only by the frantic beam of Reyes's flashlight and the terrifying, intensifying blue glare leaking from the furnace room door, which was now completely off its hinges. The creature, a colossal, amorphous mass of swirling, starless black, was moving with impossible speed, filling the gap of the doorway. It was repelled by the intensity of the chemical light, but furious and disoriented by the return of the town's collective noise. It's too fast. We can't outrun it through the shelves, Thorne gasped, pulling Reyes behind a stack of rusted police evidence boxes. We have to give it a focal point. Something loud, personal, and final, the ultimate noise tax bait. Reyes, clutching the grimoire, looked at the item in her other hand, her badge and chain. It was a heavy, silver shield, her identity, her commitment to the law, and the single loudest, most significant symbol of the noise they created. My badge, she whispered, her hand trembling. It's everything. It represents the order this thing hates. Thorne nodded grimly. That's psychological noise. But we need physical noise to get it to stop and feed. He thought of Sergeant Dale's death. He was loud. He was full of light. The creature fed on visible energy and audible desperation. Thorne reached into his shirt and pulled out his own final piece of noise, a small, gold locket. It was an antique gift from his late father, a musical locket that played a slightly tinny, familiar lullaby. He hadn't opened it in years. It was the only memory he had allowed himself to keep separate from the job, a relic of real, emotional noise. "This is loud, Reyes." "Loud and personal," Thorne said, his voice raw. "It'll stop to feed on this." He quickly wound the locket's mechanism. The sweet, fragile, yet distinct lullaby began to play, its melody unnervingly high-pitched in the massive, dark chamber. The creature froze instantly. The churning black mass in the doorway stopped moving. It didn't glide. It simply snapped its attention to the delicate, persistent musical note. The blue chemical light from the furnace room poured out, illuminating a horrifying detail on the edges of the mass. Countless distorted, ghostly shapes of human faces, the victims of the Code 307 incidents, trapped within the void. "Go. Get to the door and be ready to push." Thorne ordered. He took the small, musical locket and sprinted across the concrete floor, running toward the entity. He felt the cold pressure of the entity's presence, a terrible draining sensation that made his skin crawl. When he was only 20 feet away, he wound his arm back and hurled the locket directly into the center of the churning black mass. The moment the locket made contact, the sweet music vanished. It didn't stop playing. It was instantly consumed. The point of contact ignited with a brief, furious flash of residual energy, like a dark synapse firing. The entity snarled a low, mechanical grinding sound and surged forward, focusing its entire, hungry mass onto the spot where the musical locket had been absorbed. "Now, Reyes." Reyes, already positioned by the doorframe, grabbed a heavy, rusted beam of angle iron left near the door. As the entity focused its consuming power on the space where the locket was, she shoved the full weight of the angle iron against the wall, striking the furnace room doorframe. The intense blue chemical light inside the room, powered by the battery surge, seemed to snap to the point of noise. The light didn't just illuminate the creature. It seemed to physically adhere to the black mass. The grimoire's inscription flashed into Thorne's mind. "The core light is its only prison." Thorne and Reyes, pushing with all their might, managed to wrestle the heavy, warped furnace room door back onto its remaining hinge and slam it shut. The concentrated black mass, too busy consuming the powerful personal noise of the locket and reacting to the intense blue light, was momentarily trapped. They threw the heavy, steel support bar across the door just as the mass hit the interior, a muffled, gargantuan thud that shook the entire basement floor. They ran. They didn't look back as they climbed the stairs, the sound of the desperate, concentrated rage of the entity rattling the walls of the foundation below. When they reached the main floor, the police station was quiet again, but the normal kind of quiet, the steady, low hum of the revived electrical grid, the crackle of the newly restored radio static, and the faint, sweet smell of fresh rain through an open window. Havenwood was loud again. They collapsed onto the floor of the main office, both officers breathing heavily, the grimoire lying open between them. Reyes looked down at the book. The final, blood-drawn diagram had changed. The symbol of the spoked wheel was now overlaid with a single, looping chain, the chain of Thorne's locket, and underneath, a final, chilling entry: "It is contained. The light will hold it until the next silence." The keepers of the grimoire must now watch the town. Because the town is what feeds the dark, and the dark will come back for its book. The silence of the police station was now the familiar, welcome kind. The distant drone of the air conditioning, the low hum of the fluorescent lights, and the persistent crackle of the main dispatch radio. Dawn was still hours away, but the threat felt momentarily banished, trapped beneath the foundation. Thorne and Reyes sat back to back in the main office, their breathing slowing, the acidic smell of the furnace incident clinging to their uniforms. "We did it," Reyes whispered, her voice husky. She was staring at the grimoire, which lay on the desk, its leather cover now warm to the touch. "No, Reyes. We locked it in a pressurized can," Thorne corrected, shaking his head. "We didn't kill it. The book says it's contained, and it also says we are the keepers now." He pointed to the final inscription, "The dark will come back for its book." It's a conduit, Reyes realized, gently running her hand over the cover. This book isn't just a journal. It's a map, a lore, maybe even a part of the creature itself. The original keeper was recording the feeding patterns, but the creature used the book to draw us to the core light, its prison. Thorne picked up the phone. Dead. He slammed it down. The town's power is back, but the phone lines and network are still severed. We're isolated, and the sun isn't up. We have hours. The realization was chilling. The entity had allowed the power to return to lull the town back into its routine, and to buy itself time to recover from the explosive noise tax. It was a patient predator. "We have to get rid of this," Thorne said, reaching for the grimoire. "We burn it. We seal it in cement. Anything to stop it from coming back." Reyes pulled the book away. "Wait. If we destroy the book, we destroy the only warning system. The creature wants the book back, which means the book is key to keeping it contained." She flipped through the final pages again, finding a new set of entries that had appeared on blank parchment in the middle of the night, a log written by an unknown hand detailing the events of the last few hours. 04:12 a.m. The lullaby noise. Sufficient personal energy for the temporary bond. For 20 a.m., containment achieved. The light core holds the static mass. For 25 a.m., the second keeper is chosen. The archive must be kept clean. The town must not know the quiet time. Knowledge is the loudest sound. Reyes looked up at Thorne, her eyes wide with understanding. "We're not just cops anymore, Thorne. We're part of a watch, a secret order. The entity feeds on collective silence and ignorance. If the town knows about the quiet time, the code 307 disappearances, the collective fear and noise will become too chaotic, feeding the entity enough to break containment. So we keep the silence. We lie," Thorne concluded bitterly. "We report a massive, citywide power surge caused by a sabotage attempt at the sub-basement generator. We bury Dale's death." As they discussed their desperate new mission, the station's main door slowly swung open with a dry, ominous creak. Standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the pre-dawn gray, was the chief of police, Elias Vance. Vance was a man who preferred to be asleep long before midnight, but here he was, fully dressed, looking eerily composed. Vance stepped inside, his eyes passing over the disheveled officers, the scattered files, and finally resting on the black, leather-bound book lying between them. "Thorne," Reyes, Chief Vance said, his voice flat. "The radio's been a nightmare. Reports of a blackout, explosions. I came to see the damage. And I see you found the archive key." Thorne immediately stood, placing himself between the chief and the grimoire. "Chief, it was a grid failure. We had to manually engage the chemical backup, which caused a localized explosion in the furnace room." Chief Vance raised a hand, cutting him off. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched the corner of his lips. "Save the report, officer. I know what happened. I'm the one who ensured the phones were routed through the old 1965 landlines before the station's main power cut. I heard your final radio transmission before the furnace," the chief said. "And I know about the keepers." He took a slow step closer. "I also know where the grimoire belongs. It needs to be put back in the evidence locker, sealed, and the code reset. It's what my father taught me, and his father before him." Chief Vance was talking about the previous chiefs of Havenwood, men who had overseen the 1969 and 1985 Code 307 incidents. "You're a keeper too, Chief?" Reyes questioned, gripping her sidearm. "No, Officer Reyes," Vance said, his voice dropping to a low, resonant tone that sounded disconcertingly familiar, the same voice they had heard on the radio, warning them not to make noise. "I'm the one who makes sure the keepers do their job. And the town stays quiet." Chief Vance took another deliberate step, the movement unnervingly smooth for a man his age. His eyes, devoid of emotion, were locked onto the grimoire. "The keeper's job is simple," Vance explained, his voice the same resonant, chilling tone from the radio. "Maintain the status quo. The entity feeds on noise, panic, chaos, information leak. The greatest noise of all is the truth. My father and his father, they understood this. They created the cover-ups, they buried the 307 files, and they ensured Havenwood remained quietly miserable." Thorne gripped his sidearm, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. "You're not protecting the town, Chief. You're managing the monster. You kept the phone lines open just long enough to record us, to determine if we'd be good keepers, obediently silencing the truth." "Precisely," Vance confirmed, a flicker of pride in his eyes. "You contained the physical threat, Thorne. Excellent work. But you've already made too much noise with your intentions. Talking about burning the book, discussing the quiet time, that's dangerous. The keepers must not be loud. The grimoire is the safety valve. It must be returned to the evidence locker, sealed, and forgotten until the next blackout." Reyes tightened her grip on the book. "No. The book itself says, the town must not know the quiet time. That was a lie placed by a prior keeper or by the entity itself. Knowledge is what keeps us safe, Chief." Vance smiled, a slow, chilling gesture that didn't reach his eyes. "Knowledge breeds panic, Officer Reyes. Panic breeds chaos. Chaos is the feast. I am simply ensuring the creature stays satiated with the static of the archives, not the screaming of the streets." He took a final step, his bulk overshadowing them. "Hand me the grimoire. This conversation ends now. Sergeant Dale was too loud. Don't make his mistake." Thorne knew a physical fight was impossible. Vance was their superior, and attacking him, even with the truth on their side, would be career suicide, likely resulting in immediate containment and silence. He also realized Vance's entire identity was tied to maintaining this deadly lie. His power was derived from the town's ignorance. "Okay, Chief," Thorne said, lowering his weapon slightly, playing along. "We understand the protocol, but we need to document the incident. We need the official key to the evidence locker. You still have it." Vance, seeing their submission, let his guard down slightly. "No need. The protocol is simple. The master key is held by the longest-serving keeper. That's me. I'll take the grimoire and reseal it." Before Vance could finish, Reyes moved. She didn't attack. She aimed her flashlight, now recharged by the returned grid, at the large, metal filing cabinet next to Vance's head and clicked the light on and off rapidly, creating a blinding strobe. The simple, rapid, physical action of the light switch, a purely mechanical noise, caused an instantaneous, visceral reaction from Vance. He roared, not a human shout, but the low, guttural grinding sound they had heard emanating from the creature in the furnace room. His eyes squeezed shut, and he clapped his hands over his ears, his perfect composure shattering. "The flicker, the static. Stop the noise," he screamed, his voice momentarily layered with that familiar, resonant distortion. Thorne realized the terrifying truth. Vance wasn't a keeper. He was the entity's oldest, most successful host, or a hybrid of man and dark static. A protector of the quiet time because he was fundamentally linked to the creature. The flickering light and mechanical noise was painful to him. Thorne lunged, not for Vance's weapon, but for the keychain on his belt, the heavy brass ring that held the master evidence locker key. Vance swung wildly, his movements slow and powerful. But the disorientation from the flickering light gave Thorne the fraction of a second he needed. He tore the keys from Vance's belt. Reyes, get to the radio. Tell the next town. Tell them the truth about Code 307. Create the biggest, loudest noise possible. Thorne yelled. I'll deal with Vance. Reyes, still holding the grimoire, sprinted for the dispatch room. Thorne backed away, holding the master keychain up like a weapon. The Keeper tradition ends now, Chief. We're going to make Havenwood the loudest, most chaotic town in the state. Reyes burst into the dispatch room, the heavy brass master key in her hand, the grimoire clutched under her arm. Behind her, in the main office, she heard the sickening thud of Thorne being thrown against a desk, followed by the chief's distorted, grinding roar. Keep it loud, Thorne, she screamed, focusing on the console. The radio array was lit up, humming with renewed power. She slammed the master key into the lockout override slot, bypassing the chief's preset security silence. The console glowed green, ready for a town-wide emergency broadcast. She grabbed the microphone, her hands slick with sweat, and pulled the grimoire close to the mic. She needed to broadcast not just a warning, but the details, the noise that would breed legitimate fear, not just vague panic. She took a deep breath. Attention all regional police and emergency frequencies. This is Havenwood PD, Officers Reyes and Thorne. Code 307 is active. This is not a drill. Repeat, Code 307, unexplained communication loss due to external interference, is not a retired code. It is a predatory entity that feeds on silence and light energy. As she spoke, she flipped through the grimoire, reading the chilling facts into the microphone, her voice rising with desperate urgency. The entity is held in the sub-basement of the Havenwood police station, contained by a volatile light source. The entity is drawn to silence and preys upon those who know the truth and keep it quiet. The Havenwood disappearances were not accidents. They were consumed by this thing. The chief of police is a host or a construct of the entity, attempting to maintain the quiet time. Reyes was creating the exact chaos Chief Vance had warned them about, the mass, collective fear, and informed panic that the creature found indigestible. Meanwhile, Thorne was struggling in the main office. Chief Vance, no longer restricted by the need for secrecy, was moving with inhuman strength. Vance wasn't fighting like a man. He was fighting like a gravitational pull, attempting to crush Thorne under his immense weight and distorted rage. You will not make the noise. Vance roared, his voice now a terrifying, layered echo of man and static. You will keep the silence. You will protect the feast. Thorne ducked a crushing blow, realizing he couldn't beat the chief physically. He needed to use the one weapon Vance was vulnerable to, the flicker. He scrambled toward the dispatch window, where Reyes's emergency light switch was still positioned. With a desperate lunge, he hit the main fluorescent light switch for the office, cycling it on and off with frantic speed. The sudden, widespread mechanical noise of the fluorescent ballasts clicking on and off, the visual noise of the flickering light, forced the chief/host to recoil. Vance screamed, clawing at his face as if the light were corrosive acid. The static. The glare. Vance bellowed, stumbling backward toward the outer hall. Thorne didn't stop. He needed to ensure Vance couldn't reach Reyes or the radio. He grabbed a heavy fire extinguisher and, timing a brief moment when Vance was stunned by the light, slammed the metal cylinder against the chief's knees. The sound was a dull, heavy thwack. The chief/host collapsed, but immediately began to ooze, a thick, inky blackness pooling from his uniform where the skin should have been. The darkness was trying to drag him down, back into the foundation. Reyes, finished with her frantic broadcast, ran back to Thorne, the grimoire clutched to her chest. I sent it. Multiple channels. Every town is listening. The chaos has started, Thorne. But as the chief/host lay on the ground, the black liquid pulsing around him, a final, horrifying realization dawned on Thorne. The chief hadn't been defeated. He was being recalled. The black ooze was drawing Vance's body toward the staircase leading to the sub-basement. The containment field in the furnace room. The chemical light was failing. The broadcast had created so much chaos, noise, that the entity could now afford to spend its remaining energy breaking containment and retrieving its host. The final entry on the grimoire, written in fresh, shimmering ink, confirmed their dread. The core light is exhausted. The host is called home. The grimoire is the only remaining tether. The book, Reyes, Thorne realized, looking at the black, surging mass that was pulling the chief toward the stairs. We can't let it take the book. The book is the tether. It's the map back to containment. Thorne looked at Reyes. Their eyes met, and no more words were needed. They had to return the grimoire to where it belonged, to serve as bait and lock the creature away with its host. The book, Thorne growled, pointing at the black fluid dragging Chief Vance's body toward the stairs. It's the final lure. It wants its archive key back. Reyes nodded, her face pale. She tightened her grip on the book, feeling the old, living leather beneath her fingers. She had sacrificed Thorne's locket. Now it was time to sacrifice the only thing that could still protect them. It has to go down. Right now, Reyes said, bringing the grimoire close to the mouth of the stairwell. The black fluid had almost completely swallowed Chief Vance's body, leaving only part of his back being hauled over the first steps. The stairwell yawned below, black as ink, but they could hear the horrible clatter of metal against concrete, the sound of the host being dragged into the basement. "Get up, Thorne," Reyes shouted. Bruised and aching, Thorne braced himself against the desk and forced himself to his feet, clutching the brass master key. Reyes hurled the grimoire. The heavy black book flew down the stairs, struck the metal railing, and fell, landing with a deep thud that echoed through the room. Instantly, the black fluid and Chief Vance's body stopped moving. The monstrous pull shifted. Every ounce of hunger, every shred of intent, fixed itself on the grimoire lying somewhere in the darkness at the bottom of the stairs. The only sound left was a great, wet inhalation as the mass of darkness pulled at the air around it, converging on the book. "Run!" Thorne yelled. They turned away from that deadly summons and sprinted down the hallway toward the garage access. Their goal was not to flee the building, but to reach the heavy, aging steel door that led to the auxiliary stairwell and generator room. They reached the steel door. Thorne jammed the master key taken from Vance into the outer lock. This is the only key that can lock the basement from the outside. Vance made sure of it, Thorne panted. Reyes glanced over her shoulder. The main stairwell door was wide open. No light came from within, but they could feel the tide of darkness rising, dragging the host and the book up with it. Thorne shoved Reyes through the steel door, followed her in, and slammed it shut. He quickly drove the master key home and turned it, sealing the stairwell. Click, clack, whumph. The lock snapped shut, loud and final. For a heartbeat, the door shuddered violently. A massive impact hammered it from the inside, the last enraged blow of something deprived of its prize. But the steel held. Thorne and Reyes leaned against the door, listening to the muffled roars from below. The sound slowly weakened, dissolving into the faint, brittle crackle of the grimoire lying somewhere in the dark, and the steady hum of the generator powering back to life. The chaos had passed. Containment was in place. Havenwood was loud again. They stood there, listening to the final quiet. They were not saviors. They were the new night keepers. They had sacrificed the book, the creature's anchor, and sealed it away with its corrupted host to preserve a fragile control. Reyes looked at Thorne, bruised, gasping, still reeling. "Thorne, what are we going to tell them?" she asked. Thorne looked around. The station was fully operational again. The radios crackled with a flood of calls from nearby towns, all asking about code 307. "We'll tell them what a keeper is supposed to tell them," Reyes, Thorne said, his voice cold and certain. That Chief Vance had a breakdown under stress, cut the power, and tried to destroy old records. That there was a minor explosion in the furnace. That he sealed himself in the basement. Thorne tightened his grip on the master key. "And we'll tell them code 307 is still a retired error code." Night had passed. The first light of dawn slipped